Now we will begin our first session titled AI and Technologies, Anticipating Global Security Challenges. We divided this session into two, and now we will begin the first part of session one. So this session is titled AI, Quantum, and Space. How can we boldly go? As you can see on the stage, we are joined by esteemed panels and our moderator. So before I hand the microphone over to our moderator, please allow me to introduce them. So once I introduce them, please welcome them with a big round of applause. First and foremost, we are joined by Mr. Yoon Jong-kyun, Director General for International Security of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea, who will be leading the session. So please welcome Mr. Yoon Jong-kyun with a big round of applause. Thank you. And next, we're joined by esteemed panels, both online and offline. As you can see on the stage, we're joined by Ms. Ariel Cohn, subject matter expert and consultant of the Institute for Defense Analysis. Please welcome her. Thank you. And Professor Zina Assad, senior lecturer of Australian National University. Please welcome her. Thank you for joining us today. And next, Professor Cho Kyung-hyun, Professor of Computer Science and Data Science at New York University. And he's joining us online. Thank you for your attendance today. Thank you. And Professor Thompson Chenketa, Professor of International Law and AI Technologies at the School of Law of Liverpool, John Moores University. Thank you for your time. Please welcome him. And next to him, we'd like to welcome Mr. Jong-jin Kim, Senior Vice President of Hanwha Systems. Thank you for your time. Please welcome him. Last but not least, Mr. Dan Smith, Director of Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, is joining us today once again. Please welcome him. With that brief introduction, moderator, please.
Thank you. Okay, Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for joining us for the fourth meeting of the World Emerging Security Forum. My name is Jong Kwon-yoon, as introduced, Director General for International Security at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Korea. I'm honored to be the moderator for this very first session. And the title of the session is, quote, AI, Quantum, and Space, How Can We Boldly Go? Of course, the title, I think you all know where the title came from. But I think it is really well captures the key question, which was at the heart of this forum, which started back in 2021. How can we collectively use critical emerging technologies in a way that maintains but not undermine international peace, security, and stability? And today we chose three keywords: AI, quantum, and space. And as very eloquently put in the opening remarks, AI is a potential enabler of everything, including in the military domain. And now the world's battlefields are testbeds of AI-enabled systems. And in his very last book, Genesis, Henry Kissinger asserted that national power is now dependent upon computing capital empowered by AI. Next, quantum technology. We are well aware of its potential as an accelerator of everything. And it has the power to transform the cryptography and remote sensing as we know it. And sooner or later, AI models will run on quantum computers. Outer space. This is a domain essential for our information and computer technology, especially telecommunication. As our space congested, contested, and competitive, seemingly minor disruption in space can manifest as a major disruption on Earth. And all of these are fundamentally dual use in nature. And as the world has been witnessing over the past decade, the conflict environment has become increasingly gray. Whether as an enabler or as a domain, these are keywords will come into play. And to boldly go with these critical and emerging technologies, we need more than just understanding its risks. As technology evolves in breakneck speed, we have to come up with our own answers on how to address the challenges, if possible, in most agile and relevant manner. And I have 6 speakers here. I'm not going to repeat their names again, but Ariel is the founder of Magnet 10 Consulting, and she previously worked in the Future of Life Institute, MIT, Idaho National Lab, Virginia Tech, and NASA, among others. and specialize in the use of AI in the military, AI ethics, and AI policy. So let me invite Ariel to kick off.
Thank you. And I want to thank the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the organizers of the World Emerging Security Forum for having me here. I feel incredibly grateful for this opportunity to speak with you all. And as the first panelist, I feel that I also have a special opportunity to try to frame these discussions a little bit. And so I want to take advantage of that opportunity. I really like the title, How Can We Boldly Go? Because I think the key here is us. It's really about the humans. I know we're here to talk about the technology, but I want to encourage us to talk about the humans. I typically work on issues around AI and defense systems, and I also work on AI ethics issues more broadly. And I've found that it doesn't matter which field we're talking about. When we start applying AI functionality to any field, we keep running into a very similar issue. Although the problems and concerns that arise seem to be the result of AI, and they are, it's still always about the humans. So we talk about this interplay between AI and other domains, but this interplay does not happen in a vacuum. And it does not just happen because the technology has been developed. Humans created the technology, and humans created the environments in which all scenarios play out. Humans control when, where, and how this interplay begins. Now, what makes AI capabilities especially unique is that they shift when in the life cycle of the technology that humans are most involved and most in control. Now, in our discussions, we tend to focus on what could happen once the systems are already in use and once the systems are already interacting. And we tend to ask very big, broad questions. So we might ask questions like, what could happen if AI is embedded in nuclear weapons, or if it's embedded in nuclear command and control? Or we might ask, what if AI systems are used to develop new biological or chemical weapons? And I think there are a few problems that arise when we take this approach. But the one that I really want to flag today is that when we frame these issues this way, we're actually removing the humans from the scenario. And there is a lot of human activity that has to happen for any AI technology that's been deployed. But when we take this approach, we tend to focus more on the technology and much less on the human decision makers who are behind the scenes in everything that's happening. So if we want to take a human-centric approach, which is called for in the blueprint for AI, if we want humans to have meaningful and or appropriate involvement, we need to look at the role of the human much earlier in the timeline of the life cycle of these systems, and then throughout the entire life cycle of the systems. So long before any AI system is used, humans came up with the idea for the system, humans designed and built the system, humans tested the system, humans hopefully considered what could go wrong if the system is misused. Humans made political decisions about whether to deploy the system. Humans made strategic decisions about how to use the system and when. Humans monitored the system, and the list goes on and on. And so I wanted to encourage us to shift the framing just a bit so that it revolves around who these responsible humans are. There's a lot of questions and concerns that arise around who is accountable and who is responsible for these systems. And I think if we start shifting how we think about this, we can actually start to answer those questions. In my work with the IEEE, we developed a framework for bringing the focus back to human decision makers for autonomous, our project was specifically for autonomous weapon systems, but I really like the framework because I believe it can and should be used for AI in all domains. And if we start to shift these discussions to include the full time frame for the entire life cycle of the system and not just the time of use, and if we focus on the human decision makers throughout that full life cycle, then many of these concerns we have about the use of AI and the interplay of AI and other challenging technologies do in fact become more possible to address. And so the key point for me right now, and that I hope will be considered by panelists moving forward, is that these issues are ultimately human. We need to identify when and how humans are involved in every scenario. No matter how technologically advanced the scenario may seem, it still comes back to the humans. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ariel. That was perfect 5 minutes. Thank you. Next is Zanab. Right, and Zanab, she was originally an and still is an aerospace engineer, and her research explores the safety of human-machine teaming and the regulation assurance of autonomous and AI systems. Now with you, Zanab.
Thank you. I think I'm going to echo quite a bit of what my colleague Ariel has said, because I do fundamentally agree that when we're speaking about these technologies, we do often forget the human beings that were a part of these technologies throughout their entire life cycle. And AI at the moment really is everywhere. We're seeing it across almost every industry and every domain. And we've seen tremendous benefits with these technologies. They have a lot of opportunity. But unfortunately, with that opportunity come quite a lot of safety and security implications. And those safety and security implications differ for different domains. If we were to implement the same technology in, for example, the medical domain and also the space domain, we would see different safety and security implications across those two domains. And so when I think about the work that I do around the safety and regulation of these systems, I think about them very much from a domain-specific perspective, which is something that I think is often missing from the overarching policies and regulations that are coming forward around AI. This idea of creating one overarching regulation or one overarching policy that would equally and proportionately address AI-enabled capabilities across every domain is just not feasible, because different domains have different expectations, different requirements, different benchmarks, and different risk thresholds. And so we need domain specificity if we're going to address the safety and security concerns of these technologies. Now, there is a little bit of contention around the regulation of AI, and there are some people who believe that we can't actually regulate these technologies, that they've gotten to a point that has surpassed our ability to control them. And much of that debate between regulating and not regulating stems from a misunderstanding and a misinterpretation of these technologies. With the sweeping advancements of AI that we've seen over the few years, they've been accompanied by sweeping narratives of these technologies. And those narratives are often very embellished. You know, we see a lot of things about AI advancing of its own accord and making decisions and going against the end user. And these narratives, unfortunately, are not technically accurate. And despite them not being technically accurate, their prevalence in our discourse has made it so much so that most people agree or believe to some extent these narratives. And it's shifted people's expectations of how we put guardrails around these technologies. And so one of the challenges in the work that I do is building safety frameworks and building regulation around not only the technology, but around people's expectations of that technology. And people's expectations are a very powerful thing, because if we put forward regulation or we put forward guardrails that don't meet people's expectations, the response to those things that we put forward is not going to be a positive one. And that's not something that we can ignore. We can't ignore the public not agreeing or not thinking that what we have done has met the standard that they've set for themselves based on an embellished narrative of AI. So one of the things that I try and do in the work that I do, and again, Ariel, I'm kind of echoing a lot of what you're saying there, is we try and bring a very fundamental understanding of what AI actually is and is not capable of, and then we try and reposition humans at the center of the work that we're doing. All technical systems, be they AI or not, they exist across a life cycle, and that life cycle starts from the point of conception through to design, development, implementation, and all the way through to the point of decommissioning. And human beings are very active and very dominant actors across that entire life cycle. So when we're regulating technology, we're really not just regulating technology. We're regulating human roles and responsibilities across the life cycle of that technology, and we're regulating the industries that are developing and promulgating these technologies. And in today's day and age, we have a very strong tie between the technology industry and national security and defense. And we've seen this with Meta's recent announcement of partnering with defense and with national security across the US to use their large language models and their data sets. The link and the correlation between our technology industries and our international security has never been more prevalent than it is today, and it's not something that we can ignore in the safety regulations that we put forward for these technologies. And I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Zanab. That was another perfect 5 minutes. Now, this time, let me invite Dr. Kyunghyun Cho online. Dr. Cho.
Yeah, hi.
Yes.
Yes,
Thank
I
you
can
very
hear
much.
you well. Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I was invited a bit in the last minute, so I really haven't prepared as well elegant yet speech as two panelists have already done. But I thought I would just touch upon an idea of the uncertainty. So at the end of the day, whatever the artificial intelligence or the quantum computing or whatever the technologies that we're thinking about, there is an inherent notion of uncertainty that we just cannot get around with. However large our data set is going to be, however amazing amount of the compute we're going to use, our algorithmic, let's say, foundation tells us that there's always going to be some level of the uncertainty that just cannot be resolved in a way that is systematic or algorithmic. And what that means is that at the end of the day, when we start using this kind of artificial intelligence systems for whatever the purposes we want, we eventually have to resolve this uncertainty one way or another. And often how we resolve this uncertainty is by arbitrary measure. So let's say you open the chat GPT and then you're going to start asking questions. Obviously, none of us in this room or anywhere in the world is able to give the full context under which the question needs to be answered because we actually don't know ourselves what the full context is. And in fact, the full context is something that just cannot be observed fully. And then that's a major source of the uncertainty. But what you're going to notice is that whenever you ask a question to ChatGPT or whatever else, let's say similar, let's say conversation-based large-scale language models, these models are going to just give you an answer. Sometimes it's going to give you two alternatives and ask you to choose which one you prefer. And then there comes a question. There are often infinitely many possible ways in which the same question can be answered based on what has not been observed, that is just a missing context. And these models are somehow resolving this uncertainty that is apparently and inherently there in a way that is arbitrary or at least seemingly, let's say, opaque to us. And then what does that mean? That's where, in fact, the difference between human decision-making and artificial intelligence or the artificial decision-making comes from. This difference is when we make this resolution of this uncertainty. Humans resolve this uncertainty by thinking about the consequences that are inherently important for us. We often cannot even list up what those criteria that we use in order to resolve the ambiguity. Of course, everyone has their own, but at the end of the day, what is at the core is what kind of impact we're going to see once this uncertainty is resolved. And then this impact is going to be on us and impact is going to be on society. Now, on the other hand, when we build this kind of artificial intelligence system and then whatever the technology you use, I have worked on these technologies all over my career. And then still, we often don't know how to even resolve it, how to build a system to resolve these uncertainties in a way that we want it to. So these systems are going to make a resolution that is just arbitrary to us. And then now, here, this is where the issue comes in. Now, one might simply say that we need to just simply have the humans in the loop, or we're going to create some kind of safety or the safe, aware framework under which these AI systems are going to be used. But when we all talk about this as a nice way by which we can build such a framework, or the AI systems, or the included decision makers, we are always missing one thing. And then the one thing is perhaps the most important thing. And then this thing is, in fact, a group of people who are going to be subjected to the decisions that are made by these AI systems. Already in this panel, what I see is that, including myself, we are kind of people who are creating this framework, who are creating these technologies, who are deploying these technologies, and then rarely we're going to be the ones who are going to be subjected to these technologies. So who are the ones that we need to actually bring into this kind of discussion? And then who are the ones that we need to take into account when we try to build a system or ourselves, could be artificial or human-based decision-making system that resolves this inherent uncertainty that exists in any kind of decision-making process. And then as we have seen in Korea, I heard, let's say, during the past, let's say, 24 hours, as well as all over the world, unfortunately, a lot of discussions ends up giving or concentrating this power to make a decision to a small group of people and a small number of the systems that are being built. And then that's actually one thing that keeps me awake at night. And in fact, because of that, what I would like to see from this panel or the panel's title was not to talk about how can we go boldly into, I guess, into the future or into the outer space. But talking more about what do we mean by this we here? Who are we? Who are actually going to be sent to outer space or use the quantum systems or whatnot and are going to be subject to these technologies? So probably when we say how, we will probably have to think about who are going to be subjected to this technology, and then how are we going to build a system or to build a framework so that this inherent uncertainty is resolved in a way that is going to be beneficial to all the people, not to a small number of people who have already a power and have the power to make a decision that's going to simply benefit themselves.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Zhou. That was another excellent 5 minutes. And as one of the person who was directly involved in drafting of the blueprint for action, which was the outcome document of the REAIM 2024, which is hosted in Seoul 3 months ago. The final phrase of that document is what do you call it? Let's do this for the future of humanity. And when he said we, it definitely means the entire humanity. And for this country, as representing the Korean government, I can assure that it's for entire Korean population. And I'm pretty sure when you say we and discuss these type of topics, it represents all the people, the entire constituency that we're responsible for. Okay, thank you very much for that one. And let me move to Thompson. And actually, Professor Thompson Changata, which is one of the key members. He's current member of the UN Secretary General's Advisory Board on Disarmament Affairs. And he has been also a member of UN Group of Government Experts on Lethal Autonomous Weapons. And by the way, these first three speakers to my left, they're current member of the GC REAIM, Global Commission of REAIM, and their contributions in the REAIM process has been enormous. Now, Thompson.
A very good morning to everyone. Firstly, my appreciation to the organizers for this really timely event and for the leadership of the government of South Korea. So in my intervention now, I'll try to focus firstly on 4 points relating to this question of the interaction between artificial intelligence technologies or emerging technologies and existing weapons such as biological, chemical, and nuclear weapons. The first point that I would want to make is the idea that certain chemical, biological, nuclear weapons are already prohibited by law. Therefore, when addressing the emerging threats posed by emerging artificial intelligence technologies, when we talk of this convergence with existing chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons, it is essential to begin by recognizing that existing international law largely already prohibit the use of many nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons. I think it's an important starting point that we are not starting from scratch. The second point that I would want to highlight is that it relates to the concern about AI's impact on decision to use force. In this case, use of certain nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons. Although a few certain states possess these weapons, which I consider ethically and legally problematic weapons, they have refrained from the wanton use or deployment of such weapons, which has helped prevent another catastrophic world war, or even, I would say, extinction of humanity. And this restraint, in my view, owes much to the fact that humans have maintained human control over the decision to use such weapons. However, artificial intelligence technologies poses an existential threat to this principle of human control, potentially enabling deployment of these chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons with devastating consequences. In this regard, I try to underscore the need to codify the principle of human control over the question of artificial intelligence and to make it a fundamental norm in international law. My third point, which I consider a little bit more important, at least from my identity politics, and it ties to the question or which area was mentioning, to say focus on the human, and I'll add there to say focus on the victims. And this this point is the impact of AI on the production of smaller and lighter weapons, which are already having a devastating impact in the global south. When considering the impact of AI on the global security, discussions like the ones which we're having today often focus on major military capabilities, the ones that I've been mentioning, nuclear weapons, biological weapons. However, it is equally critical to address the security challenges that are faced by other stakeholders, particularly in the global south, where the proliferation of smaller and lighter weapons is already a problem. The report of the UN Secretary General's Advisory Board on Disarmament Matters, to which I'm a member, of 2024, particularly emphasized this point to say, whilst it is understandable when we focus on these other major weapons and how they are impacted by AI technologies, we ought to remember how these AI capabilities leads or exacerbate the more production of these smaller and lighter weapons that are actually already causing harm to certain communities. Indeed, the UN Secretary General has underscored this concern by stating that the weaponization of the outer space create an infrastructure that in a way see people who are already being victims to some of these lighter weapons facing harder situations in terms of their security. Now, my fourth point, which is my last one, it relates to where I say I must emphasize on the need for a decolonial perspective and decolonial conceptualization of what we mean about balance of power in the global security framework. Often when we're making this point, we emphasize to say, well, we're trying to make sure that power remains balanced. It almost creates an illusion as if when we're talking about these technologies, we're talking about balancing of powers across all nations in the world, across all peoples. That's not necessarily true. The balance of power that we're talking about, we are talking about the need of continued dominance by certain states, by certain peoples, in as far as this security of the globe is concerned. Here I want to link to the question that concerns particularly the African continent. The African Commission for Human and People's Rights, in its recent report of the working group on the impact of minerals, and I'm concluding on this part, the impact of the minerals that Africa has, that are number one, relevant to the development of these quantum technologies that we're talking about. The majority of such minerals are actually the source of conflict in Africa, where they're being extracted to develop this kind of technologies. But what is this place? What is the place of Africa in this global security that we're talking about? What is the value or weight of the voice of African states in this global infrastructure of security that we're talking about? Victims, perhaps. That is the larger part, and I would want to end on that.
Thank you very much, Thompson. That was perfect 7 minutes, and I think your remarks just now resonates perfectly with all the previous speakers. Okay, now next I want to invite Mr. Jongjin Kim, and he's currently head of Space R&D Center at Hanwha, which designed lower Earth orbit satellites for Earth monitoring and communication. And before joining Hanwha, Mr. Kim worked for Blue Origin on Amazon. Mr. Kim.
First of all, thank you very much inviting for this meeting with this great, distinguished panelist. And then since I'm in the industry, so I was very lucky to watch what's happening in the industry very closely. So today I'm going to share some of the things that I have watched so far, and then since I'm in the space industry, I will touch upon what's going on, what kind of innovation is happening now in the space industry, in terms of some of the optimistic innovation things, and then if I have a chance in the later time, I want to also share some of the challenges and the threat that we are facing right now in the industry. So. AI and then quantum technology and then space industries are among the most exciting and then transformative like research areas today. And these fields are like drawing significant attention, as you all know, and are sparking some controversy depending on the focal point of the discussion. So space industry actually in particular is undergoing left and then groundbreaking advancement as well. Right now, this era is called a new space era, especially in the space industry. It's characterized by the innovative achievement like SpaceX, the renewable rocket technology, which are differentiated from traditional space industry. Because we are able to make money right now, unlike like a traditional space industry, through that reusable rocket system. So people in this industry, they are, have brilliant idea with a lot of innovations. Unlike SpaceX, there are several, like the companies are pushing the boundaries right now in the space industry. Some of the companies beyond the SpaceX has ambitious idea to launch to reduce the launch cost. I'll give you some of the examples that I have watched very closely. In the US, there is like a startup company called Spin Launch. So they have like a brilliant idea. When you are very young, I have, many people have that kind of experience. You are like spinning the lock with some wires and then release into the area that you want to reach. So Spin Launch has a similar idea. They have like a electric-based big arm swinging around, to launch the like a 200 kilogram the payload satellite into the low Earth orbit, like the space. So they're very successful with that idea, and I like that idea because all the innovation in the space industry is blooming right now due to that like a reusable rocket, and then people getting a lot of money and then investment from all over the world, and then they're competing each other with their ideas, which is because that idea that have a lot of innovation is happening right now. And then that's the launch system. And then on the other side, we also have like a satellite industry. One of the big satellite industry, as you may know, that the Starlink has already like 7,000 satellites in the LEO orbit, and then they are serving a lot of area where they don't have like a very good internet connectivity before. And then, as you may know, that they also serve the world in the Russia and Ukraine, and then they prove that huge impact to the communication from the satellite communication. And then not only for the SpaceX, there are some other companies who's following very closely to launch many satellites in the LEO orbit for internet service, like the Kuiper, the Amazon Kuiper. They are planning to send around like 30,000 satellites. And then OneWeb also have more than 600 satellites, and then providing service to the government and then B2B business area as well. And then there are another very exciting the things going on in the LEO space. I don't know whether you have ever heard that there are some startup company called like ASD Space Mobile. So they have brilliant idea what they can do from their technology point of view is that they launch their satellite into the LEO orbit, and then they want to provide the communication connection to the mobile phone directly without going through any other relay. So they launched some test satellite like 2 years ago, and then they proved their technology by connecting from their test satellite to the Samsung Galaxy S22 this April. And then they are able to download like up to 10 megabps download from the Hawaii. So they are showing the capability of the space for the communication as well. And then as part of this communication, ASD is not only the one, and then as you know, that Starlink also partnering with the T-Mobile, and then they provide, they want to provide their mobile communication from the space through the T-Mobile network as well, which is very exciting to see. And the second exciting thing is happening in the imaging satellite. So because as you know that right now, the greenhouses problem is a key, and then there are many. The satellite is also developing by the companies for the observation. So that's the another things is going on right now. But I'll close here, and then I'll have and then next time I'll explain a little bit more. Thank you.
Thank you very much for showing us the state-of-the-art innovation in the space field. But please be advised that you should be ready to identify all the risks associated with all the innovations that you just mentioned. Okay, finally, last but not on the least, Mr. Danspeed, and your perspective on everything just that.
Thank you very much, and it's fascinating to listen to the speakers on this panel, all of whom I assure you have way more technological knowledge than I do. I'm interested in the policy questions and therefore very much in issues of control. And as I said in my opening remarks, one of the challenges that we face is that the frameworks of arms control are breaking down, or indeed have broken down, partly for political reasons, and partly also, it seems to me, because the technological ground is shifting under our feet and things will change. So the formulae and the approaches that we have been used to for arms control since the early 1970s are becoming more questionable. So the way that I think about this, and I think there can sometimes be questions about the terminology which are used, and one needs clarity sometimes about that. So I'm going to use the word domain, which has been used before and is used a lot in the sort of high-tech sphere, but I'm going to use it in the military sense. So through history, there were two domains, land and water, especially the sea, but not only the sea, lakes, rivers, so land and water. 20th century brought us third domain, air. We now have 5 domains. Add outer space and cyberspace. So when you hear a discussion in the military or the security or peace research context about multi-domain issues, it's a question of application of technologies across these 5 domains. In that sense, in that vocabulary, AI is not a domain. It is a set of technologies which have applications across those 5 military domains. And if one is thinking about regulating behavior within those 5 domains, for example, about what weapons may be deployed, no chemical and no biological, or how many weapons may be deployed, this number of nuclear or that number of nuclear, or who may deploy which kind of weapons, because the Non-Proliferation Treaty has bound some 170 states not to deploy nuclear weapons and permitted 5 to do so. All the time, one is thinking about the regulation of technologies within those 5 different domains. And the point really is that artificial intelligence has an impact upon the application of technologies. And the point that I was raising earlier on in the remarks because I've been privileged to have 2 bites of the cherry, right? The point I was making is that in ways that we, or at least I, cannot yet foresee in full detail, quantum technologies are going to change that more. And it's said, and rightly said, that AI is the great enabler and quantum is the great accelerator, but quantum is more than that. It's not just about doing things quicker. It's about changing the possibilities of sensing, of observation. It's about changing the possibilities for imaging. It's about changing possibilities for communication, encryption and disencryption, and for navigation, and probably other uses as well. And so when we look to think about how to regulate, when it becomes politically possible to be thinking about how to regulate and taking steps to reach agreement on, for example, keeping the new nuclear arms race within certain kinds of limits, we're going to have to think about the fact that that arms race will probably be less quantitative than the predecessor of the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, and more qualitative in non-kinetic, intangible ways. That's to say, it will be about the deployment of technologies within cyberspace. And outer space is a kind of hybrid domain, because both the intangibility of some of these technologies applies there, but it's also, outer space is the physical location of a considerable degree of cyber capacities. And so it is perfectly possible to think about both non-kinetic and kinetic aspects of competition and conflict in outer space. So all of these are the challenges for regulation that we need to be thinking about. And at the moment, all I'm doing is laying out the questions in a sense of puzzlement. And for me, that's part of what this forum, this panel, this discussion, the talking over a drink or at dinner this evening is all about, is trying to figure out what these questions are, because until we have the questions clear, we have little chance of getting the answers. Thanks.
Thank you for that masterful review of all the remarks from the floor. Now, let me draw little questions. I think everybody, to different degrees, either identified the risks associated or the innovations that would be a potential answer to those risks. Now, I'll go around the floor once again. From my immediate left to Ariel, there's a question about I want to ask a little bit about the current government policies. Can you review, can you just scan the horizon on the current state of the international domestic policies on how to ensure the proper human involvement, and any proposals you want to make or any points that you want to emphasize other than you just said in your opening remarks?
Okay. I don't know that I feel prepared to look at all the regulations that are currently. I think a couple minutes is too short for that. So I actually want to flag a couple of things that came up that I would love to see happen with regulations. So one, talking about, or considering the points that I was making, I do think we need to be looking much more closely at the full life cycle. And we need to be starting at much earlier stages of the life cycle to be considering how we're holding humans responsible and accountable. And that is, as I've mentioned, that's work we've been doing at the IEEE. We do have documents already put together. I would love to see norms and standards around documenting how people are responsible and accountable, but also, norms and standards for verification and validation of different systems. And I really want to hit a point that Thompson mentioned as well, and I'm not sure I have a good solution for regulation here, but one of the things that I have issues with is how we frame a lot of these problems. And we tend to look at what happens once the AI system has been deployed and used, and what do we do moving forward. But as Thompson mentioned, the other thing we do is we tend to focus on these really big existential problems that are actually distracting us from the very real issues that are happening right now. And I think we need to be, and also as other speakers mentioned, we need to be trying to figure out how to incorporate who is impacted by these technologies into the regulations. And there have been efforts to do that. I think some of the risk-based attempts to regulate AI are a good step in the right direction. To touch on what Zena said as well, I think looking at the domains specifically is really important. The different domains, whether you're talking about the 5 of military or the many others. And I would also like to see us start considering AI not as a single entity, but rather as an umbrella term that is covering a lot of different technologies, some of which are much more problematic than others. And we really need to be breaking down what those different capabilities are and how they're being used in different contexts. I think we'll get much stronger regulation if we start breaking it down more.
Thank you very much for that answer. Now to Zena, I want to focus on the issue of AI security and safety. So, for example, in case of nuclear field, nuclear security and safety are clearly distinguished. One is about the proper kind of safe operation of the nuclear facilities or technology, but the other is protecting humans, protecting those nuclear facilities from humans. The other one, nuclear safety, is protecting humans from nuclear like installation, but security is in the other area around. Now, when it comes to AI safety, when we're talking about AI safety and security, I think the distinction is a little blurred because there is an issue, there's a process of training the AI, and because this is basically underpinned by a digital world, the cyber world. The security, if there's without proper enough AI security, then AI safety is not guaranteed. But it's really hard to distinguish them. Have you ever? Do you have any specific views on this? How we can discuss both AI safety and security at the same time?
Safety and security have been very closely interrelated for a long time, be it for AI technologies or other technologies. They often overlap and the two are often spoken about together and mistaken for one another. But safety and security are not the same thing and they are distinguishable, especially for AI as well. Security is about protection of the vulnerabilities of a system at a technical level, and safety is about the minimization of harm. And those two are very different things. Now, of course, there are some similarities and some overlaps between them, but they are distinguishable. And what distinguishes them is their intent and their purpose. And so when I think about AI safety and security, and I think about it from the context of international security, in particular the military domain, rather than whether or not they can be distinguishable, what's most challenging about them is that I actually believe their intention. I think safety and security in the military domain are definitely in tension with one another, because we're using these systems to bring harm to another party in defense of our own party. So in security of ourselves, we're bringing harm onto somebody else. And so these two concepts are very much in tension with one another. And one of the challenges in particular with AI, and it's one of the points that you brought up before about data and the training data, is with Meta's recent announcement of collaborating with the US Defense and US national security agencies, one of the things that's missing from that announcement is transparency on how that data is collected. And what I'm thinking about from that perspective particularly are the end users. So most people don't realize that when they're using these systems, which are free to use, although really nothing is very free, what they're taking from you, and the reason that it is free to use, is because when you input information into large language models like ChatGPT, and many of us input very personal information into them, things like emails and things like other personal information, what we don't realize is that ChatGPT stores that information and uses it to further train the model, to further improve it. And so if Meta has put forward this relationship with US Defense and US national security without a clarity on how that interrelates with the end user and the way that we're using these systems, these two seemingly very unrelated things, the technology industry and the defense industry, become very coupled and very related. And then we see this tension between safety of our end users, and we see this tension between safety and security really come up a lot more prominently. So while they are in tension, they still are distinguishable, and really from my perspective, when I'm thinking about the regulation of these systems and the safety of these systems, I think about them from the reduction or the minimization of harm. And like you were saying before, Ariel, really thinking about the broader life cycle of these systems. Those end users are a huge part of that life cycle and often a very overlooked part as well.
Thank you very much, Jenna. Now third questions to Professor Kyung-Hyun Cho. I haven't added my own short introduction on Professor Cho, but he is one of the computer scientists who has been working on this field, machine learning and natural language processing, for a very long time, probably longer than any known scholars of like his generation. Now, I want to throw a question that is partially based on your comments just made. Suppose that you're currently working as an advisor on this issue to any national leader. What would be the first things that you want to emphasize? And if you are given a task to train others, like other like junior officers or junior like staff under your auspices, what are you going to where are you going to start from? What do you want to teach them?
Oh, that's a big question. Let me try to answer that from the perspective of being a professor and a researcher. You're correct, actually. It's somewhat weird to me to see how everyone is reacting to ChatGPT and other large-scale language models, in particular during the past 2 years, because the entire technical foundation behind this ChatGPT and its derivatives were already created if 5 years ago, if not 10 years ago, if not 15 years ago, if not 20 years ago. In fact, one of my postdoc work from University of Montreal when I was a postdoc with Joshua Benjo was on coming up with the algorithm called the attention mechanism that has become one of the most important or most widely used technologies underlying all these language models. And then I've been working on that one ever since 2014, nonstop, built a machine translation system for various languages, sometimes a system that works with multiple languages and whatnot. But somehow it had to take about 10 years for people to realize, and then people to see that these technologies actually do have a very impactful applications, and thereby perhaps we need to regulate or do something about it. Now, what it actually tells me is that there is a huge delay. So this is one of those technologies where the delay between the technological innovation and the deployment in the system is extremely short. Even then, there was a delay of the 10 years or so. So there was a decade of the delay. Now the question is, whenever this innovation hasn't stopped, we are continuing to work on this kind of research and the innovation is continuing to accumulate, then what we need to think about is not really about what are we going to do in terms of regulating these technologies that are based on how they are deployed now. Because in 5 years, 10 years, we're not going to talk about the things that were already done 10 years ago. We're going to actually talk about the systems that are built based on what is being done at the university labs or the research labs or whatnot, that none of us, and including myself, would have even heard of. I go to these scientific conferences to hear about what people are thinking about. And then what I know is that the 99% of them, I'm not going to know about it, but there is the 1% that I'm pretty sure is going to be more impactful than what I did 15 years ago in terms of contributing an algorithm for the language model in 15 years back in the future. Now, what that means is that what is missing here is not a policy people. What is missing here is not to teach them how to use language model. In fact, nice thing about these language models, you can use them, you can try it, and then you can actually feel the impact yourself. You gotta use it every day, and then that's how you know. What is missing here is that none of this government at the moment, as far as I can tell, is actually ready to put enough investment into the research, thereby having enough scientists who are actually at the frontier so that they will be able to detect what the next technological innovation is going to be. So I look at the NSF, I look at the NIH, I look at the Department of Defense, let's say funding and whatnot, being a professor at US university is all about grant writing. And then what I see is that unfortunately, all those agencies are giving out money to all these university professors to work on language models. And I actually talk to some of these program managers, I tell them that this is ridiculous. This is a technology whose research was already done 10 years ago. Companies are making money out of it, in fact, billions of dollars. And then investors are ready to put in anywhere between 10 to 100 billions of dollars in this industry sector, while the government or the policymakers need to put in the meager amount of money on this language model technology. It's not about that. These governments, or if you're thinking about the safety or the regulation, then you have to look much further into the future by investing into this kind of basic research and then making sure that any of these nations that we may be interested in does not run out of the people who are actually working at the frontier of science. That is the most worrying thing. Once you run out of the people who are working at the frontier of science, effectively, no one in that nation will be able to tell what's going to happen, not even 10 years, but next year, year after. So that would be the one advice I give is that at the end of the day, what government can do and should do is to think longer term rather than trying to rip the fruit out of what is already being ripped out of the industry at the moment. So invest in this kind of frontier research. That would be the advice.
Thank you very much. Now, Thompson. Now, just a few weeks ago, we got the first UN First Committee resolution adopted on AI in the military domain and its implications for international peace and security. You may have heard it already. And the UN Secretary General will, should be publishing his like substantive report by next year. Now, as an expert in this field, what are your expectations in these kind of report efforts, and what would be the best way forward for responsible AI in the military domain after that sort of UN report is being published pretty soon?
Thank you very much once again for the question. Indeed, I was just saying the resolution, the confirmation. I think what is mostly important, or what was I think a positive, is to see that I think about 166 states voted in favor, only 3 abstaining, and 15 abstaining. What I find particularly important about that report is that it's in its first paragraph. It references the question of having to remember that international law, including international human rights law, which is a branch of international law, is applicable to most of these technologies in the military domain, including autonomous weapon systems. I find that particularly important, especially the idea of having to ground any policy frameworks that we may want to come up with within international law, all those international law branches that are relevant, for 2 particularly important reasons. We are at a point whenever there is a new technology that is coming up, there are new terminologies and ideas that people start coming up in terms of how policy should look like. If we are not careful sometimes, in most of the cases, new technologies, new ideas on policy frameworks may dilute what is already agreed and protective of humans. I'll give just an example. Often, even so, perhaps well meant, we are seeing already when we're talking of the impact of AI technologies, even so in the military domain, that we are saying we want to mitigate risk, we want to mitigate bias. Those terminologies, I understand, they make sense more fully when you are in the tech area. But within international law, for example, international human rights that we are referring to, those terms don't have meaning. If you're saying mitigating bias or mitigating discrimination, what do you mean? The obligation that is already agreed by states, it's elimination of discrimination, it's not mitigation. So the importance of remembering that international law applies, it's a question of drawback to what first of all has been agreed. Then look, what are there gaps that we need to deal with? Otherwise, if we run with it, coming up with these new terminologies and saying we're agreeing without questioning what they mean in already binding norms, we may be actually heading for a very big problem. I think that what I would say, that the expectation is to say by 2026, perhaps, I'm hoping that at least maybe there's something legally binding already being negotiated. I know it's being, but I hope so. Thank you.
Thank you. And to Ms. Chongjin, from the business perspective, what are the areas for space industry collaborate with AI and quantum? I think you already touched upon these pieces, but if you can, in case you can identify the risk, also identify the risks associated with them, could you please wrap that in like 2 minutes?
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Then I'll briefly touch on the quantum, especially rather than AI, because we already have many AI experts here. To me, the quantum comes to like 2 different technology. One is the quantum computer. The other one is quantum communication. So quantum computers, so researchers are working really hard to make a quantum computer. That means that we will bring a lot of benefit due to the huge amount of calculation capability. But that brings us another challenge, which is like encryption, which is a match to our topic today. So that's the same for the space industry as well. So we are vulnerable to the encryption issues due to the quantum computer once they come out. So that one of the solutions for that, working to solve the quantum computer problem, is that people are trying to use the quantum communication, which is known to be unbreakable encryption methodology, based on the quantum technology. So in 2016, the Chinese researchers demonstrated the possibility of using the quantum communication using the LEO satellite. So that right now, the many researchers are working really hard to make it possible in the practical way. But there are some technical challenges to overcome right now, but that's the one hot area that the space industry and then quantum technology is working together right now. And then I'm really excited to see in the near future solving the problem pretty soon. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Now finally to Dan. Before I turn the floor to Dan, who is the wise man on this entire speakers among the speakers, and I want to like wrap up what has been just said, and then give you a chance to comment on everything. Now, so far, if I can wrap up what has been just all the comments that has been made, I think what the task for this, not only with this audience, but the entire the audience. Perhaps what the world should be doing is really to update ourselves on many fronts. First one is actually do learn what, for example, in case of AI, what do actually AI means, and we need to break down the concept and really understand what exactly that will bring to us. And at the same time, we heard enough very good. Very important intervention from Professor Cho about the importance of making proper investments in frontier science. And secondly, we also need to update the way we approach these topics. Dan mentioned about the importance of updating our own framework, policy framework, because all the previous framework that we've been using, for example, in the field of arms control, it's no longer, at least it's not fully applicable to the new reality that we are facing right now. And third, how are we gonna do, well, we haven't heard the full answers, but how do we gonna, each society, and so within the nation and between the nations, how we can discuss the issue and actually create a better, whether it's governance system, whether it's an new international norm, how are we gonna continue the necessary discussion? So and there has been enough, there was also a very important point mentioned by Professor Cho, which is we really need to look into the future at the same time. I think this resonates with the comments made by Dan in his welcoming remarks. Now, back to you, Dan, and can you give us your wrap-up on the discussion we just had?
Yeah, small challenge. Thank you very much. Very kind of you. I think, first of all, I would go back to what I was saying about 5 military domains and then the technologies to think about. And if I were looking for regulation in the arms control, under the arms control heading, so not thinking about the civilian side or other risks, but I would say that one needs to focus on something that, for shorthand, I would call a tech domain interface. In other words, that it's not, I don't find it feasible to think about a regulatory framework for emerging technologies in the security sphere. Right? I find it more feasible, though still really puzzling, to think about what could be thought about in relation to deployment of artificial intelligence within, in relation to nuclear weapons in the outer space, or thinking about the maritime domain, or whatever. So then to take an example with ballistic missiles, and then I want to come to a completely different example, a small arms and light weapons example. So with ballistic missiles, it's always been thought that submarine-based weapons were pretty much undetectable. They could hide away in the vast ocean depths for long periods of time and survive anything that happened to the homeland, and therefore they were the sort of the weapon of last resort, and knowing that that weapon of last resort existed and was more or less invulnerable, then that was the deterrent effect. Now what happens if, because of quantum sensing, and by the way also the effect of climate change, which also has an effect on sensing possibilities under the sea, it becomes possible to really much more straightforwardly locate and identify submarines. Do then the submarine-launched ballistic missiles lose that safe, deterrent, last resort effect. Now, I should add in parenthesis that I don't really believe in any of this theology anyway, but that is the logic which has been driving arms control and strategic force development for years amongst the great powers. That's why China is wanting to develop its own submarine-based ballistic missile force. And so with that, you've got a challenge. What to do? Do you say, well, possibly there will be countermeasures that come out? Or are you now trying to see how to address the vulnerability that you think is emerging through this technological deployment? Is it possible, taking the life cycle argument, to step in early and prevent that line of technological development? Honestly, I'm a bit skeptical about that. I think it would be really cool if it were, but I don't really believe in it. So something else has to happen. And I can't see at the moment a way to address that that doesn't involve some kind of dialogue, some kind of openness, and therefore greater transparency between the great powers, but therefore between the states of the great powers and the rest of the world, and also their citizens. So there needs to be, to my mind, there needs to be some kind of transformation in the way that those security issues are being discussed. And at the same time, I think it's inevitable, if we take an arms control framework, as for anything to do with regulating arms that's not general and complete disarmament, competition will continue. And the point is how to keep that competition within relatively safe levels. There's another side of all of this. If you're thinking about how to regulate small arms and light weapons, artificial intelligence, quantum sensing, observation could be really interesting and exciting possibilities for making a breakthrough so that arms trafficking becomes a completely different kind of enterprise for the traffickers, much more risky for them, much less possible to get away with, and thus the African Union ambition of silencing the guns could actually start to become something closer to reality in a continent that really, really needs that. And in the same way, monitoring ceasefires. You know, probably the thought of firing the first artillery shell has no sooner occurred to a commander's mind than the monitoring systems are able to pick it up. And the response from monitoring and observation and compliance can be that much quicker and more interesting. So I think there are both sides to think about this and to push it forward. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Sounds futuristic, but that's exactly what we are aiming for, and to go boldly. Now, there are 4 minutes, but I want to give a chance to floor for questions and answers. When you ask questions, please kindly identify yourselves and tell us whether you're going to ask the question in English or in Korean.
If you have a question, please raise your hand and we will deliver the microphone to you. So we will hand the microphone to you, and can you please stand up and deliver your question to our esteemed panels?
My name is Hui-Jin Lee, member of Korean Council on Foreign Relations. Thank you very much for exciting and very impactful discussion. We are now living not just in physical world, but also in cyber world. But we are now aware of the uncertainty of cyber world because we are living in physical world. We have talked about the uncertainty and the necessity for regulation. We are, of course, having norms in the physical world, but we are now aware of the regulations in the cyber world because we are normally laymen. And I was relieved to hear that in the congratulatory remark, and also you have mentioned about the resolution that passed in the United Nations recently, of course, in quite absolute majority, number of states in favor. And not just in the military domain, in other areas, is there any discussion for the regulation of cyberspace? Because there are diverse areas inside the cyberspace. I want to know about it, if you. Thank you.
Anyone would like to stand up for answers? The current state of discussion on the regulation on cyberspace with military implications. Anyone? Zeno.
So there are regulations around cybersecurity, but just echoing some of the comments I made in the beginning, those regulations are specific to specific domains. So I know that there are regulations around cybersecurity in the military domain specifically, and then there are also some in the civil domain. And I think it's really important to note that cybersecurity concerns existed prior to the AI wave that we're currently experiencing. And so some of those measures have been developed and implemented for quite some time now. But AI does pose some unique cybersecurity challenges, and I think that's the point that we now have to focus on. So we do have existing measures, but they will need to be augmented in order to cater for the unique safety concerns that AI-enabled capabilities do bring.
Yeah, just to add quickly that there is also a continuing discussion in the UN about cybersecurity and about what kind of measures ought to be employed. And the problem about that is that in recent years it started to bifurcate, so that you have essentially a kind of a Russian and Chinese set of proposals being discussed, which are actually quite interesting and have a lot to commend them. And then you have a US, UK, France, Germany set of Japanese set of proposals being discussed, which are also quite interesting and have a lot to commend them, but don't overlap perfectly or dovetail with the other ones. And given the international atmosphere at the moment, kind of that's where it stands. But there's a lot of thinking going on, and there's a lot of process happening about exactly about the cybersecurity field.
Okay, thank you very much. I have like 18 seconds left, but is there anyone who wishes to ask questions before it concludes? Okay, that doesn't seem to be the case, and if not, thank you very much for everyone, each one of your panelists, and also for Professor Cho, who's on a journey online from New York, and thank you for the audience for making this discussion more fruitful and interesting. Okay, this will
Thank you
then
very
let me
much.
finish this session.
Ladies and gentlemen, please give a big round of applause to our esteemed speakers and our moderator. Thank you. Now, we'd like to ask you to please return to your seats. Thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of our first part of session 1, and we will soon commence our second part of session 1. We kindly ask all of you to please remain in this room and be seated. We will have a short moment to reset at the stage. So please be seated and wait for the start of our next session. Thank you. Your Excellency. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we will now commence the second part of session 1. We kindly ask you to please proceed to the venue and please take your seats. 네, 여러분, 저희 잠시 후 1세션 두 번째 파트 시작하겠습니다. 모두 입장해 주시고 착석해 주십시오. Thank you very much for your patience and welcome again. From now on, we will begin the second part of session 1. And this session is titled AI, WND Nexus, Risks and Responses. And as we did before, we do have our moderator and esteemed panels on the stage, so please allow me to introduce them. First and foremost, we have our moderator, Mr. Wilfred Wan, WMD Program Director and a Senior Researcher of the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute will be our moderator. Please welcome him. Thank you. And next, we'd like to welcome our 6 esteemed panelists on the stage. Please join me in welcoming Mr. James Andrew Lewis, a Senior Vice President of the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Once again, please welcome him. Thank you. And next to him, we're joined by Professor Akiyama Nobumasa, Professor of Hitotsubashi University and Director of Center for Disarmament, Science and Technology at Japan Institute of International Affairs. Please welcome him. Thank you for your attendance. And please join me in welcoming Ms. Laura Grego, Senior Scientist and Research Director of the Union of Concerned Scientists. With a big round of applause, please welcome her. And next, we have on the stage Ms. Jimena Viveros, Managing Director and the CEO of iEquilibrium AI. Please welcome her. And we do have Mr. Ili Barkatari, a President and CEO of a Special Competitive Studies Project. As you can see on the screen, please welcome him with a big round of applause. Thank you. And last but not least, Mr. Michael Carmian, Director of Digital Diplomacy of Microsoft, is joining us here at the stage. Please welcome him. Thank you once again to our esteemed panelists for joining us from near and far. With that, our moderator, you may have the floor.
Thank you so much. It is working. Okay, thanks. Hi, everybody, distinguished participants. This session considers ways in which AI is impacting or can potentially impact on weapons of mass destruction, including in their development, acquisition or transfer or use, as well as how states and other stakeholders think about and approach these weapons. We have a very impressive group of panelists, so I'm going to skip the formalities and jump straight to the first round of questions on risk. And we're going to start with Jim to set the scene. Certainly, we're seeing the prevalence of AI. Can you talk just about the potential impacts from a strategic perspective, including in the context of WMD?
Sure, thanks. And this is something I'm actually currently working on, so let me try and make 3 quick points. First of all, imagine a war where you had one side that had immense technological superiority, almost unlimited resources, control of the air, and another side that wore robes and sandals and used rusty AK-47s you had given them 40 years ago. Which side wins? Technology is not determinative, right? So that's a good point to put this in. Second issue, there is a set of technologies, and we've talked about some of them: space, quantum, cyber, electronic warfare, new emerging technologies. And some of our interlocutors in strategic negotiations, opponents have said, look, these new technologies give you the ability to create strategic effect without using nuclear weapons. So I think that's one of the reasons we're here today, is there's a set of technologies that allow you to circumvent the classic deterrence, allow you to step outside the bounds of arms control. And one of the interesting points we've heard from Thompson and from Dan and others is we keep coming back to the need for negotiation. Okay, final point, what is strategic effect? And a lot of what we do has no strategic effect, right? So it's like it's kind of boring. But what is strategic effect? It's the ability to advance your national interest. It's the ability to coerce or persuade opponents, right? Using military means or other tools. And finally, it's the ability to inflict damage or harm onto economic and military capabilities. And so I use this a lot in cyber. If people always talk about cyber attacks, okay, but was there any effect on the economic or military capabilities of the target state? And if the answer is no, there's no strategic effect. So we can sort of put things in this context and ask ourselves the question, which of the emerging technologies right now on the battlefield right now would give you strategic effect? And I think that's a hard test for many of them to pass. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Jim, for discussing kind of the wide-ranging aspects of strategic effects. I'm going to turn to Nobu, and we're going to focus on the nuclear aspect of it, which has already come up in the first session as well. But how might AI integration with nuclear technologies affect deterrence and other aspects of nuclear weapons policy?
Thank you, Wilfred, and thank you, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea for inviting me to this very timely and interesting occasion. Since I'm originally from non-nuclear weapon states and also originally from the field of arms control, I wasn't sure whether I'm an appropriate person to talk about the relationship between artificial intelligence and nuclear deterrence. So instead of sharing my thoughts about it, I would like to share my questions associated with this intersection between AI and nuclear weapons. So fundamentally, I've been always wondering whether AI would be a game changer, or which poses totally new questions regarding the nuclear deterrence, or kind of amplifier which could magnify the already existing problems associated with the nuclear weapons. So I'm more kind of inclined toward the latter case. So we still have so many questions and problems related to nuclear stability, as we have witnessed during the war in Ukraine. Russia kind of exploited our concerns on the nuclear stability or the nuclear deterrence by exciting our expectations for the stability or avoidance of a nuclear war. That Russia tried to manipulate the escalation in their own terms. So that problems, is nothing to do with artificial intelligence. And the question is, does artificial intelligence will help, reducing the threats and risks of that? And probably as long as nuclear deterrence and nuclear, competition exists, I think nuclear artificial intelligence actually doesn't really help much. So in the previous panel, they talked about the importance of the human elements in the sort of handling the technology, and these human elements never go away from the nuclear deterrence game, even if we have witnessed the evolution of artificial intelligence. So what would artificial intelligence affect or change the operation of nuclear weapon systems? I think most significant contribution would be the improving ISR intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities. And probably that helps, one, to accurately identify the targets, and secondly, probably shorten the time for decisions, so accelerating the cycle of monitoring, analysis and detection, and a choice of solutions, and command and implementation. And so this, the function to shorten the decision time would help, the stability, or rather that is going to help gaining the superiority vis-a-vis adversaries. I think that our expectation is that, our deterrent capability will be improved by equipping artificial intelligence in these capabilities. And then we are able to gain a superiority over the adversary. The question is whether that kind of introduction of artificial intelligence in a sort of a mutual things. In other words, so we are going to develop this capability, but at the same time, adversaries also do the same thing. And in that case, what would be the sort of implications? So there are risks associated with that. That is mostly about, not about the capability itself, but about suspicions on both sides. So if they have better capabilities for accelerating the decision process, then we are in a situation where use it or lose it. And the same thing could happen to the other side. So eventually, arms control or nuclear stability is somewhat in a mutual consent on the state of the balance of power. So we agree that there is a stability here. But at the same time, another aspect of arms control is to set a rule for the strategic competition. And within a framework of strategic competition, people want to get superiority. And so our question on the artificial intelligence, how artificial intelligence would affect this, both the seemingly contradictory objectives in arms control, so seeking stability and gaining superiorities. So I think, artificial intelligence could affect more on the latter part. And then another question is about the concept of, human in the loop. Many people mentioned that, ultimately, the people should be involved in decision makings. But we haven't really yet elaborated the concept of human in the loop precisely. So, maybe I'm going to rephrase this question, human in the loop, into like who is responsible for the consequence of the use of artificial intelligence. And in particular, when we are talking about the linkage between WMD and the artificial intelligence, the consequence of use of these the nuclear weapons is much far greater than use of conventional weapons on the battlefield. The consequence of the battlefield is pretty much different from the consequence of the use of nuclear weapons. So I think ultimately, who is responsible for that? That means probably state leaders. And if you pose the responsibilities to state leaders, then the question is, how come they are really convinced to take responsibilities if they don't know much about technology and the consequences before they make a decision? So I probably would like to pitch in a question, how are we going to make the state leaders to be more aware of the consequence of use of artificial intelligence in the context of WMD? Thank you.
Thank you, Nobu. I think you raised quite a lot of questions and issues. Your point about responsibility echoes some of the discussion of the first session. And I think one of the important points you made is that AI integration isn't taking place in a vacuum. So there are some uncertainty about what the effects could be as well. I'll turn over to Laura now, and we often talk about AI in this larger set of emerging and disruptive technologies, also drawing upon developments in cyber and outer space, as Dan mentioned in the first session. From the perspective of nuclear risk, how does the impact of AI compare to or interact with these other EDTs?
Thank you for the invitation to be here and for all of the really interesting insights we've already heard. And I'm going to draw on some of the same things that Nobu mentioned just right now and what we discussed in the first session. Again, of course, we're in as dangerous a time as we have been in many decades with respect to nuclear weapons, with the threats of nuclear use being used to backstop a conventional war in Europe, and concern that crisis in the Taiwan Straits or in the environs might draw nuclear-armed states into direct conflict. I think nuclear-armed countries are very aware of the risks of deliberate nuclear use, but I'd like to turn to how AI and other emerging technologies might affect the risk of miscalculation or inadvertent escalation to nuclear use, or pressures, as Nobu mentioned, of use it or lose it, or the ability to cease nuclear use once it's started. Of course, many of these issues were tackled in the Responsible AI for Safer Tomorrow conference that was here just a couple of months ago, but I'd like to dive in, just focus on a couple of them that have particular concerns for me. So I'd like to focus on two aspects that are, I think, mutually reinforcing aspects of AI as it and other emerging technologies as they are partnered with nuclear weapons, speed of decision making and vulnerability. So first, I see enormous risk, of course, in the types of prompt launch nuclear postures that the United States and Russia have adopted and which China seems to be preparing to, or at least considering. These systems include the technical ability and the doctrines that allow for the launch of nuclear weapons upon detection of an incoming attack. And under such circumstances, the decision whether to launch a retaliatory strike includes enormous time pressure. Ballistic missiles and other hypersonic delivery vehicles for nuclear weapons are so fast that leaders of nuclear states essentially have only a few minutes to decide how to respond to the warning of an incoming nuclear attack, putting extreme pressure on them to make what could be civilization-altering decisions. And they may have potentially incomplete, misleading, or incorrect information. How does AI affect that situation? We know that AI may be introduced in several ways through intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, through early warning systems, through command and control and decision making. They're going to be used as a way to speed up the processing of complex data from radars and satellite-based sensors faster and providing this decision-making advice. The degree that the AI-assisted decision-making is an improvement to what currently exists remains an open question, and that's partly technical and that's partly social. We know that human beings don't make good decisions under pressure. Does the incorporation of AI improve any aspect of this? We know that command and control for nuclear systems are almost always designed for speed and not for sober reflection. So these time and reliability stressors must be examined as part of a system with a decades-long track record of human mistakes and technical failures causing nuclear near misses. So we want to consider very carefully introducing another set of systems that may have biases or other unintended effects. The other concern I have is that the incorporation of advanced AI and machine learning techniques, they might reinforce the sense that these time-compressed nuclear decision-making systems are safe and reliable, and thus are realistic and desirable, when in reality these techniques may introduce additional risks to an already risky system. And additionally, as new types of technologies are incorporated into strategic postures, such as cyber weapons, anti-satellite weapons, and other novel delivery systems, they might further compress the time to make decisions. And there may be yet more pressure to introduce AI into nuclear decision-making. So I'm cheered that the US and China has recently agreed that, in principle, humans should be in the loop for nuclear decision-making, and that we should avoid automated decisions, but I do think that's only one aspect of the concerns that we should be looking at. Second, the second basket of issues, which I think are mutually reinforcing with the first that I identified, is that policies such as launch on warning that I just described, or launch under attack, are generally responses to the vulnerability of a state's strategic systems, with most concern about land-based missiles and command and control assets. Will the incorporation of AI and machine learning techniques increase the vulnerability of strategic systems, or perhaps equally important, the perception of the vulnerability of strategic systems? I thought Zana made a really interesting point in the last panel that the narratives are very important. So perceptions as well as the technical realities are something we have to pay close attention to. If they do increase the vulnerabilities, these developments might increase incentives to set up fast response, use or lose nuclear weapons postures that Nobu just mentioned. These new vulnerabilities might include AI-aided cyber attack on nuclear command and control systems, or the nodes that are in space. It may increase the ability to track ballistic missile carrying subs underwater that Dan mentioned in the last panel as well. These are all serious considerations for states. The answers to these questions also will be different for different states with different levels of technological investment and development. It remains an open question how uneven access to these technologies will impact a state's choices about how to deal with these new potential vulnerabilities. So I want to close with sort of some questions that we should be asking ourselves and encouragement. I think we do want to be very thoughtful about how and when these new technologies are included. And I think we want to take a look at how they might increase risk to the overall system. We should be looking holistically. How do they affect our obligation to disarm? Do we get too comfortable improving nuclear systems so that we're losing sight of our obligation to wean ourselves away from nuclear weapons? And how are we going to start thinking about arms control? I think it's not too early. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura. I really appreciate that you're concretizing kind of the discussion about risk scenarios, including on capabilities, but also on human effects as well. I'm going to turn it over to Jimena now. And we're using AI as quite an umbrella term for a set of technologies, just like we do with WMD. Are there ways in which AI capabilities are fundamentally challenging what we think of as WMD?
Hi, so thank you. And first of all, I would like to thank the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the organizers of this event. And I also want to show my respect for the resiliency of the Korean democracy, given the last events. So first of all, I mean, we're in a panel that addresses weapons of mass destruction. So I think it's important that we start off by acknowledging or reminding ourselves that there is no clear definition of what constitutes a weapon of mass destruction and what is the threshold for that. Obviously, nuclear, chem, and bio are mentioned explicitly in a 1977 United Nations General Assembly resolution. However, it also leaves open. It just says, and any other weapon developed in the future which might have characteristics comparable in their destructive effects to nuclear or other of the other weapons listed above in that resolution. So then the UNODA, the United Nations Office of Disarmament Affairs, has further elaborated and delved into saying that it is any type of weapon that in a single moment can have an enormous destructive effect or cause death, injury by chemicals or dissemination of disease-causing organisms, or can deliver nuclear, chemical, or bio weapons for hostile purposes or in armed conflict. So that also leaves us another window open because it also can be used in peacetime. So I would also like to turn now to the International Court of Justice's case law, where we can also find further elaboration on this. So for the late Judge Shahabuddin, these weapons are any that have destructive capabilities in one single use and are unable to comply with IHL. This is complemented by customary international law, which says that any type of weapon that cannot comply with the principle of distinction, which is distinguishing between a civilian and a combatant, is by nature prohibited. Also, the late Judge Cansado Trinidade said that it was any weapon that caused unnecessary suffering or whose effects cannot be limited to military targets, so also related to the principle of distinction. In my opinion as well, this could even constitute crimes against humanity as per the Rome Statute and the hopefully soon convention, as in they are systematic, which means of an organized nature, and widespread, which is large scale, all of these attacks. And crimes against humanity happen during peacetime, so again, not only in armed conflict. So I'm giving all of this overview because I want to bring the attention to a type of technology related to AI, which I think is a weapon of mass destruction, which is drone swarms. So the importance of labeling these swarms as weapons of mass destruction or recognizing them as such, as we can see the clear resonance with everything that I just said with the swarms, is because just the mere recognition of weapons of mass destructions bear a stigma. So this would lead to deterrence. This would lead to non-proliferation efforts, ideally. This is also part of General Assembly resolution from 2004 that encourages states to prevent the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. Actually, fun fact, during the negotiations of the Rome Statute, the very early ones, the weapons of mass destructions were considered as to be included for war crimes, the use of them. Later on, the compromise came up to just prohibiting any means or methods of warfare which inherently are indiscriminate. So drone swarms, as we know, are a large number of swarms that can go up to thousands. We saw a display, I mean, a very public one, even in 2018, so it's very early, of over 1,374 to be precise, drones that were displayed by China, out of which a third, so 474, I believe, were deviated from their course. So that shows some of the risks, which I will address later. So I'll leave it at that, but I just wanted to pinpoint this type of technology related to AI, which could be potentially a weapon of mass destruction. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jimena. I think certainly effective risk reduction requires risk assessment, and risk reduction requires challenging our assumptions and going beyond simply what has come before as well. I'd like to turn it to our online participant at this stage, and AI is something that's certainly been referred to as a game changer in the military sphere. Nobu suggested earlier that it might be more of an amplifier in the nuclear side of things. Ely, can I ask you to reflect on this a bit, and how worried should we be about arms racing dynamics in the space?
Hi, good evening from California. Thank you, first of all, for having me. I'm truly sorry that I couldn't be there in person. And I spoke at your fantastic summit also last year, so thank you for having me back. And truly, an honor to be with such a distinguished group of panelists. I would like maybe to have another approach to the conversation we're having tonight, because we're talking about what is the purpose of our military actually adopting AI? Because I think that is the fundamental questions we have to ask first, and then what is the rate of adoption by our military of artificial intelligence? When we looked into what can AI do for the military or the military sphere, as you indicated, I think there were four broad categories that we, as a Special Competitive Studies project, identified. Number one is AI can be a huge enabler for the back office responsibilities of our military, helping them with the cumbersome administrative processes. And I think, cyber defenses, logistical issues, all those things that I think our military should not have a hard time adopting because they're low risk for adoption, but also it would be beneficial from the cost cutting perspective of our administrative burdens. The second area, and I think one of the earlier panelists noted about this, is the AI adoption for the purpose of indications and warning. And on our side, we talk a lot about prediction of fires, predicting human disasters and natural disasters. And so how can indications and warning and AI application in that space really enable our military and our societies to be better prepared by having access and having these kind of enabled I&W systems in place to avoid some of these catastrophes. The third category I think that we're touching a little bit on the panel tonight is the category of decision making. How are these systems going to make humans better informed and provide them with more options? And how those are options that are better informed, and they also have associated risk and also the opportunities with those options. The last category I think that is predominant theme tonight is the category of like AI and the system and the AI-enabled weapon systems. To that space, I think we have to be really mindful of the systems we have in place to test and evaluate this category of weapon systems, what processes, policies, and procedures we have in place before we deploy these kind of capabilities. I think all our governments are struggling with this point right now because traditionally we're built for different kind of weapon systems and different kind of acquisition processes. And I think as these new systems are introduced into our weapon systems, I think we need to have a hard look about how we do testing, evaluation, and deployment of these kind of systems. The other category of policies and procedures we have to look at, it has to do with the international legal considerations. Most of our systems have been built for legal and rule of law frameworks that are probably need to be relooked at the time of the new era of AI weapon systems. Another aspect that we have to be really mindful is, where does international cooperation fall into the space? And I think this is an area in which I think we all have to think much more creatively about how do we create a new public-private partnership, because I think although we're talking about military weapon systems in this space, most of these systems are built right now in private sector. And so without having private sector included in these conversations, I don't think we will be able to create any kind of international framework on these systems going forward, or whenever these systems are capable to achieve the missions we are all talking about it. And then the last point I would like to make, while, we all come from democratic countries and we all have rules and procedures in place, we have to be mindful of the geopolitical situation we live in right now, where we have what we call it an axis of disruptors in China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran, who I don't think will play by the same rules that the community of nations that we all represent in this panel will. And so we have to be mindful that as we develop these new procedures for how we will use these weapon systems, these countries might not be transparent in the way they're building and deploying these systems. And I'm talking about China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. They might not want to share anything in terms of how they're building and deploying these systems. And as the geopolitical situation really it puts us to a greater risk daily, we have to find the right balance with how we as democracies use and build these kind of systems and the geopolitical and the security environment we're facing in the coming months and years.
Thank you so much, Ely. We'll talk a little bit more about the geopolitical situation in a second. You made a point about the role of the private sector, and that's a segue into the last question of this first round over to Michael. Advancements in AI are being primarily driven from the private sector. What does that mean for risk, in particular from the perspective of international peace and security?
Thank you, Wilfred, and thank you to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea for organizing this forum. It's a pleasure to be back in Seoul so soon after the REAIM summit in September. Wilfred, you mentioned that advancements in AI are coming from the private sector. I think it is important to recognize that we are where we are thanks to the inputs and investments of a range of sectors. For example, the incredible research that has come out of universities and academic centers in a number of countries for decades now have really led the branch of computer science that is AI to the point that we are at today. Equally, governments have played a tremendous role in that, funding research and also being supportive of AI in numerous ways in numerous countries. But absolutely, that's as we think about sort of advancements in AI as a branch of computer science. As we also think about advancements in use cases of AI, again, we see that across a number of sectors, including in the context of this discussion in the military domain. If we can broadly categorize where those advancements are and then apply them specifically to the military domain, I think on the one hand, you see algorithms increasingly being responsible for analyzing data and identifying patterns in ways that were previously only possible by humans or not possible by humans. And you also see algorithms increasingly making recommendations or even making decisions, either in support of or in place of humans. And again, we are starting to see that increasingly in the military domain too. If we then drill down to where we see specific use cases, as Nobu and Laura mentioned, this includes in intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, ISR, also in target tracking and recognition, TTR, as Ili mentioned, in the context of logistics and supply chains. So much of armed forces work is in supply chains, and of course, as well, in cybersecurity. But absolutely, these advances do create a wide range of, I think, multidimensional risks. If I can offer just a couple of categories, one is in dissemination and accessibility risks, touched upon by Carl Bildt in his opening remarks, because unlike traditional defense technologies, AI is more widely accessible and easier to replicate, including by non-state actors and malicious actors. This does create real risks in terms of misuse in hybrid warfare, cyber influence operations, and cyber operations, including by adversaries who could use commercially available AI tools. Another category of risk, the second category of risk, would be the governance gap, whereby AI technologies are evolving faster than regulatory frameworks. There's been a phrase used for many years now that technology advances exponentially whilst policymaking advances incrementally. There is still some truth to that, but I think the gap is closing. And there's also a recognition, including within the private sector, that its role must be complemented by robust national and international governance frameworks to ensure responsible use. Whereas the older sort of mindset that regulation stifles innovation, I think has sort of seen its day and is no longer as commonly mentioned as it was previously. One way that the governance gap is already starting to be filled is through, for example, an initiative launched by the United Nations earlier this year, specifically the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research. They launched a multi-stakeholder platform called the Roundtable for AI Security and Ethics, or RAISE, RAISE for short. RAISE is focused on responsible use of AI in the military domain by seeking to mitigate harms and risks associated with AI in national security, as well as supporting multilateral governance and promoting beneficial uses of AI in national security. One specific topic it is also looking to address is the third category of risk, accountability under international law and human rights. As has already been mentioned a number of times, international law, including under the UN Charter, international humanitarian law, and international human rights law, sets out very clear obligations for states. States have very clear duty to protect human rights, and there is also a corporate responsibility to respect human rights. And that does play a critical role in AI innovation. Private sector actors do need to ensure that their AI innovations align with these norms. But actually what that means in practice in this context isn't as clear as it needs to be. What should corporate policy look like? What should corporate due diligence look like? What should corporate remedy look like? There needs to be a lot more clarity in those spaces. And then the fourth category of risk I'll mention is equity and access. The private sector absolutely must ensure that it's, the impact of its innovations, they're aware of the impact that it has on the global AI divide, because high-income countries, of course, do dominate AI innovation, which still leaves low and middle-income countries at a significant disadvantage, and it's one that exacerbates existing risks and heightens risks of exploitation and further destabilization, just as Thompson mentioned in his remarks earlier. And certainly this old paradigm of technology and policy being developed in the West and hoisted on the rest, again, that's something that has been a problem in previous decades, but is one that we absolutely need to move away from. And as a step back and think about these risks in totality, again, I think it just underscores the importance of partnership here, underscoring the partnership between the private sector, policymakers, civil society, academia to bring deeper technical insights and cooperation.
Thank you so much, Michael. We're going to delve a bit more into the regulatory aspects with this next round of questions, including in the context of WMD. I'd like to leverage everyone's perspective a bit more, and so I'm going to pair you off and then ask for maybe 3-minute responses to each of the questions. And so I'm going to start with Ili and Nobu. So a number of multilateral initiatives considering AI in the military domain are looking specifically at this AI nuclear nexus. Can you speak, Healy, from a nuclear weapon state perspective, and Nobu from a non-nuclear weapon state perspective, what are some of the key concerns? Where do you think there might be common ground for moving forward? So we'll turn it over online first to Healy.
Thank you. I think that's a really important question. I think history in how we have managed the nuclear weapons can be instructive, but I think we have a different challenge today, and that is, during the Cold War, the governments were in charge of building and safeguarding nuclear weapons. AI is built by private sector companies, so I think there's a huge difference here in terms of who has access to these capabilities or who can have access going forward. So that's one point. The second point I would like to make is there are two important pieces to AI, the hardware piece and the software piece. And I think on both instances, you don't deal with the same number of countries that have access or that have the same capability. Because on the hardware side, you're dealing with a set of countries that are building the semiconductors, really that get us to the cutting edge of these AI applications. And on the software side, not only you're dealing with the software as a platform, but you're also dealing with the ability of countries to build data centers, countries that have access to enormous energy resources. And so I think when it comes to AI, the nuclear parallel is intriguing, and I think we can learn a lot from our historical lessons. But I think this is a different kind of a technology that is much more diffused, it's much more accessible, and can easily proliferate. And so I think we have to take a different way of how we think and who are the set of actors that are going to be at the table. Because as I mentioned earlier, we as democracies might have different set of rules and responsibilities, and who can you hold accountable if things go wrong. But I don't think we have seen anything similar from a set of countries assembled around China, which is North Korea, Iran, and Russia, in terms of how they're building these capabilities, how they're using them for military purposes, not to mention that China has a civilian military fusion. And so I think we just have to be realistic going forward about how we are building these capabilities, how can we bring our private sector to play much more closely with the government sector, and what is the necessary requirement for the infrastructure going forward. Because if you look for the next generation of these models, we will hit eventually a data wall, the energy maximum capacity that we need for these models. So how can we, as government of these democratic countries, build together the infrastructure requirements so at least we know who is building these systems, how can we hold them accountable, and who do they respond to? Unlike, as I mentioned, a set of countries that we have zero to no knowledge of how they're building it, for what purposes, and for what objectives.
Thank you. Nobu?
Yes, thank you. Probably I should talk from the perspective of arms control. So the question is it possible to regulate artificial intelligence for the sake of improving nuclear stability and reducing nuclear risks? So as I mentioned earlier, if the one side has a strong intention to deliberately escalate the nuclear risks, probably it's impossible. And it doesn't mean anything for us to whether or not to regulate artificial intelligence or not. So our task is probably how to minimize the risk, which is probably unintendedly happening. And so then how much arms control approach would help? Probably it's kind of difficult. One, in the history of arms control, there is no precedent that that there is a kind of regulation of technology before that was put into the operation. And of course, artificial intelligence has already been embedded into the conventional forces and to some extent possibly nuclear command and control systems. But again, artificial intelligence is not the weapon system itself, but it's an enabler to kind of accelerate and improve the quality of a decision system. So it is pretty difficult to regulate it from the perspective. Second is that artificial intelligence is still an evolutionary process, and it is always improving. So it is difficult for us to stop this technological innovation, artificial intelligence. We shouldn't also stop the innovation. And third, it is probably, even if we have a regulation, there will be challenges for the verification and the compliance. And how are we going to make a confidence that both every size involved in arms control are in compliance with the regulations? So then approach would be, again, come back to the definition of responsibility, how to hold the accountability on the use of artificial intelligence, and also how we should help decision makers and political leaders to take responsibilities on the use of artificial intelligence. So in a sense, there are so many international efforts to discuss on the artificial intelligence, including this forum and another Korean sponsored AI Seoul Summit and so forth. And of course, UN high-level advisory body should be included. But then I think we have to have a kind of a mechanism which constantly updates the information on and assess the technology's evolution, application challenges, and both positive and negative implication of technologies, so that we are able to have a sort of accurate account on the technology, and then which would help the policymakers to share and establish and share the best practices for fail-safe measures and guardrails of the use of technology. And another thing, but very quickly, also we have to be a little bit considerate about the problems of technology have and have-nots, particularly in a global context. Artificial intelligence should be, and the benefit of the technology should be shared by everybody in concept. But obviously, there is a growing gap between technology have and have-nots. So that could possibly factor to destabilize the international relations. So we also need to take into account this matter on top of the potential public-private confrontations over the regulations, and also the divide between different political camps. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think both of your responses highlight kind of the complications of nuclear politics as well to any efforts to regulate. I'm going to turn it next to Laura and Michael, and there's been general recognition about the value of multi-stakeholder dialogue. Nobu just talked about that. Michael, you did as well in your first response, involving technical experts and with the private sectors. But WMD spaces could be a bit more impenetrable. What are some ways in which you see your respective communities contributing to these discussions about governance, and what frustrations remain? Laura, why don't we start with you?
Thank you. Well, I've been very glad to see that there have been multi-stakeholder, multilateral dialogue about these through the RAIM Summit and the RAISE processes, and the detailed blueprint for action. I am going to echo the other comments that the openness to involving commercial stakeholders and academics seems so crucial, because that's where the center of innovation and investment is. And this is different from the space security discussions I've been involved with over the years, where industry and private stakeholders are not as central and not as involved, because and the nuclear weapons questions, because that activity has been mostly localized within governments. I was interested in some of the technical discussions we had here, and I guess I'm being asked as a representative of the technical and the NGO community. When we were developing arms control for nuclear technologies, there were clear technical choke points around fissile material production, or clear places that you imagine verifying. In nuclear arms control, we very often limit delivery systems, because those are the types of things that can be observed and counted. And for AI facilitated technologies will have to be creative, and that will really have to be generated from the technical community? Where are the choke points? As just mentioned, there are software and hardware requirements for AI. Are there places where there's really good opportunities there? And if we're looking down the line to eventually regulating the use of machine learning techniques in strategic systems or creating norms or arms control, whatever it looks like, I think it would be helpful for the technical experts to be thinking really early about how we would do this. And I'm glad that we are. If we wanted to verify AI's use in decision making, how do we do that? And what would a zero knowledge protocol look like in the context of AI integrated into nuclear systems? Do we have to imagine a totally different model because we have a totally different set of technologies? I think that's a place where weapons of mass destruction experts, verification experts, arms control experts, and technical experts can and should work together.
Thank you, Wilfred. Yes, in terms of the role of technical expertise, I think firstly, technical experts can help to demystify AI systems, which in turn helps policymakers understand limitations, risks, and potential safeguards. If we think, for example, about AI security, which Zena well defined earlier, AI's vulnerabilities to adversarial attacks, such as data poisoning or model theft, that does require technical insights. And then with those technical insights, you can better develop robust governance mechanisms. The private sector, of course, also brings quite critical operational insights, including real-world case studies of AI's uses in cybersecurity and defense and in peacekeeping. And again, that can really inform practical governance solutions. And I think with that in mind as well, technical experts can also provide insights into practical limitations, ensuring that governance discussions actually remain realistic and implementable. There are some kind of barriers and challenges to that. So some policymakers, not all, but some policymakers, they do lack technical literacy to fully grasp AI's complexities, and that in turn leads to gaps in governance proposals. Conversely, and very importantly, the private sector sometimes overlooks the geopolitical sensitivities and humanitarian implications of AI applications. And that in turn can lead to mistrust. Another source of mistrust is the perception that private sector actors solely operate on the basis of being profit motivated or profit maximizers, and that can in turn be in tension with global security goals. And again, thinking about the global AI divide, many low and middle income countries lack the technical expertise or resources to participate quite meaningfully in these discussions, which again further entrenches global inequities. Whether a country doesn't have WMDs, has no interest in having WMDs, doesn't have AI systems in its military domain, nevertheless, it is a stakeholder in these discussions. And so how we think about bridging the gap does require sustained dialogue and capacity build-in. Again, Track 2 spaces can be very helpful in that, so that voices can be heard without the constraints of Track 1 diplomatic negotiations. And there's some very positive examples in the recent past year. The Republic of Korea deserves real recognition for the successes of its regional consultations in advance of the ReAIM summit. That's one great positive example. I think those conversations were likely the start, not the end, and so more regional consultations will need to take place on an ongoing basis. And another great success is the ReAIM summit itself and the blueprint for action, in which 63 countries, quite diverse, came out and aligned on very critical norms for AI in the military domain. So it's good to already start to see progress being made.
Terrific. Thank you, Michael and Laura. So speaking of approaches, I'm going to turn to Jim and Jimena. The two of you have experience in quite different regulatory approaches, including in other issue areas, ranging from the use of norms to laws. How do you think the AI-WMD intersection is best approached? What do we need to take into account, including when we're thinking about modalities, about regulation? Jim, over to you first. Your mic.
Since I was quick on the first one, let me take an extra minute on the second one. I probably have a unique experience in the room, in that twice in my career as a preparation for strategic arms negotiations, I was involved in decisions about the release and use of nuclear weapons. And I will say the process is not random. It's not like somebody wakes up in a bad mood and presses a button. And I have good knowledge of all the nuclear powers except North Korea, so I apologize for that. Not perfect knowledge on Iran, but There's a process, it depends on the scenario. For tactical use in the West, in the United States, it's a very complicated process. It takes hours, if not days. So I don't worry about it being automated. This is the War Games movie from 1980, and it was silly then. For strategic use, there's certain scenarios where rapid responses are required. And in those you might see after human decision made at the cabinet level by the president, you might see speeding up. But in general, it's not a scenario that comports with direct experience with the release and use of nuclear weapons. But that brings us to 4 points that I think are really important. First, no strategic effect, no serious negotiations. Having done this for a couple decades now, people aren't going to go in the room and make any concessions if they don't think there's any strategic effect. And we have had experience with that. Cyber security, for example, where there's now an agreement on the use of cyber weapons in certain scenarios. It took really, the Russians proposed the first treaty in 1998. It wasn't until 2010 that you got even the initial outlines of an agreement. So the precedent is if there's no perception of risk by the states involved, particularly the major states, they're not going to negotiate seriously. Second, what would a serious negotiation look like? What would make for meaningful negotiations? We haven't talked about that, but it's easy to have meaningless negotiations. I would say, with some respect to the private sector, that no sovereign state will yield decisions on something ultimately as important as nuclear weapons or the use of WMD to a private sector participant. Yes, there's whole political processes for engaging their views, but meaningful negotiations have to take place between those who possess the capabilities. What would be some approaches that come up in negotiations? And one of the things I think that would indicate it was a meaningful negotiation is that the opposing sides are willing to make mutual concessions. If there's no concessions, it doesn't count, right? And one of the tricks you learn in a negotiator, we of course would never do this, is you look for things that you can concede on that don't affect your posture at all. So I'll give you an example that's a little anti-Chinese. When I had to negotiate with the Chinese over missiles, amazingly enough, the thresholds they proposed were always a little bit below what their own, a little bit above, I beg your pardon, a little bit above what their own missiles could do. So in effect, we would have constrained US capabilities and not constrained Chinese capabilities. There's a real risk here that it will take time to define these concessions that would make any negotiations meaningful. Finally, and this has come up repeatedly, I think Thompson raised it, I think Dan raised it, there's an existing framework of agreement. It goes beyond WMD, but WMD is important in this. And we need to put any meaningful agreements on AI in the existing framework of negotiations that govern the use of weapons in armed conflict. Key among them are international humanitarian law and the arms of armed conflict. Jimena raised some of it, I think, earlier. But there are constraints. You can't just feel like you're in a bad mood and shoot a weapon. You're supposed to have all sorts of constraints. You may question whether those actually occur. I will tell you, in real life, they do occur. People have these discussions. What is the use that is justified under international humanitarian law? And one thing I've noticed in the 20 years I've been doing this is that that's become more important rather than less important, difficult as it may be to believe. The other thing, of course, that's come up, and it's more germane to this panel, is the existing agreements on WMD use. For the most part, you're not supposed to use WMD at all, right? There's some areas that are of concern now, usually regarding precision-guided munitions, hypersonic strike, but WMD cannot be enhanced lawfully with AI because it is no lawful use in most cases. So we need to look at the question of how do we incorporate any meaningful discussions that involve concessions by states on deployment, development, and use into the existing framework of WMD and international law. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Jimena, please.
Hi, thank you. So, having also participated in a couple of multi-stakeholder initiatives, such as the Secretary General's high-level advisory body on AI, being a commissioner for REAIM, an OECD expert, and a number of other AI governance initiatives. I think the main theme is the insistence on the separation on the regulation, like the civilian domain versus the military domain. Whereas, I mean, we all know that that division is illusory, as, you know, there's dual use, there's reproducibility, and also even by the nature of the actors who are using these technologies, because that's why I keep referring to it as the broader peace and security domain. Because the same technologies that are used by the militaries are also used sometimes by law enforcement or border control, which are still state actors but are civilian. And also by non-state actors. And that's the problem with proliferation and the easy access to it and all of these open source and models, because these non-state actors can very easily and very cheaply acquire them and use them for hostile purposes. And when we think of non-state actors, we traditionally just think of terrorism, but there are other very important actors that can cause a lot of harm, such as organized crime, even mercenaries. So it's important to remember all of this. And the discussion has been centered a lot around nuclear. And I want to point out a distinction between AI and nuclear. So since the splitting of the atom, it was immediately weaponized. So it went directly to the creation of the atomic bomb. Whereas AI is a technology that is happening simultaneously in all domains. And that creates a big difficulty because, you know, we're late in the game, and that reaffirms the urgency of governing it for the benefit and protection of all of humanity equally, because otherwise the asymmetries are going to be exacerbated. Because, as has been already said, the capabilities of developing, using these technologies, or even reacting to them is very different in the global north than in the global south. And it's very different from region to region. So the people and the communities affected will vary significantly. So the regulation needs to be global. So that's what we're advocating for, global governance. That kind of covers everything. So apart from the brilliant resolution that was passed, that was championed by our hosts, South Korea, even before the Summit of the Future, between the things that were adopted was the pact, the new agenda for peace of the Secretary General, you know, who adopted our recommendations of the high-level advisory body, which also delved into the military aspects, which was quite significant because, yeah, this shows how it really cannot just be dissociated. And I think that's very important to know. So what we have now, and what we all, from wherever point of stance that we are, is I would suggest that we advocate towards this global governance framework that is all comprising of all the domains. So what we have going on is the UN Secretary General and the ICRC's call for a binding treaty that prohibits certain uses of the autonomous weapon systems by 2026. There have been several calls. Even Pope Francis has issued many urgent calls at the G7, raising awareness and calling against this type of technologies, making life or death decisions. But we're here talking about weapons of mass destruction. So that's also important to know that AI in itself is obviously not a weapon of mass destruction. It only can be if it's converged with one of the other technologies that are a weapon of mass destruction, or is converted into one. So that's why I was talking about the swarms, because they do have the capabilities of reaching the threshold of of a weapon of mass destruction, in addition to obviously being just a vehicle or a carrier of any of the other types of technologies. So it's important to keep that in mind when we're thinking of any type of regulation and when discussing the technology in general. So thank you.
Thank you. I think one thing I'm also picking up on from all of your responses is the need for regulatory activities at all levels involving different configurations of stakeholders, and the value of bespoke solutions that take into account perhaps regional and sub-regional security dynamics as well. As we start to conclude the discussion, I do want to give each of you a short opportunity to signpost to all of us what aspects of the AI-WMD intersection do you think is still overlooked by experts or policymakers? Or can you give us one or two concrete recommendations for addressing risks moving forward? I'm going to ask you to keep this to about 30 seconds to 45 seconds, because I know better than to keep people from lunch. And so why don't we start this time in reverse order, and we'll start with Michael.
Thank you, Wilfred. I'll be brief, although you've said it's a challenge to ask such a broad question. I'll pick up on a point that Nobu made, actually, which I think is really pertinent, a very concrete recommendation here. Better understanding of the subject matter. I think, even in this discussion, we see perhaps different perspectives come out. What we need is a kind of a living taxonomy and lexicon of these issues and risks, and one that's kept up to date, and it has to be done on a regular basis and made publicly accessible so that policymakers, civil society, academics, technical experts actually have a shared understanding of sometimes quite elemental concepts, and at the moment we just don't have that shared understanding.
Thank you. Ely, please.
Yeah, I think since we live in a very digital age right now, I think we have an opportunity to do two things. Number one is we could red team these capabilities, and we would understand the risk associated with these capabilities. But also the second portion I would like to highlight is we could build digital twins of these capabilities, and a set of countries can get together, build a digital twin, and that would give us a good analysis of what works, what doesn't work, what are the implications, and what are the strategic risks. So I think unlike, nuclear weapons were tested and evaluated for a particular period of time with a particular technology, but I think in today's age, we can really modernize these things, and we can digitalize all of these things, and we can see the risk and safety issues associated with these.
Jimena?
Thank you. So I think one of the points that is overlooked, as I've mentioned, is swarm drones as a potential weapon of mass destruction. And in terms of recommendations for global governance, I think the multi-stakeholder and the multidisciplinary approach is vital in order to achieving something that is actually feasible. So that's why all types of actors need to be involved. I also think it needs to be global. I mean, we live now, unfortunately, in a world where international law seems to be violently violated and with blatant impunity, and I think that needs to stop. And I think each one of us should really, from wherever we are, try to advocate for that and also for global governance. And just one very final remark. I think AI really has a capability for good if we manage to reap their benefits equally and manage to do this for bridging the digital divide and bridging the global north and the global south. But we're unfortunately not moving in that direction. So it is something that we should also all contribute from wherever we are to correct and to set the path straight for the protection and the benefit of all of humanity. Thank you.
Laura, please.
I think I would re-identify the theme that I mentioned at the beginning is just the concern about introducing complexity and risk in the name of creating more authoritative information and speed in a system, just being very careful looking sort of globally with the systems point of view. I guess something that I didn't mention, but I'd like to, we talked about risks and opportunities. I'd like to see more research and attention on scholarship about what places where AI might provide stabilizing opportunities. It might be able to better help us verify arms control agreements, better characterize and detect underground nuclear tests, for example. We have enormous amounts of data that we've collected. Will that help us in the future? Detecting proliferative activities such as fissile material production or diversion, or dangerous behavior by satellites and in space. So to look at the ways where it might actually provide us some opportunities for stabilizing activities.
Nobu, please.
Yes, thank you. Three things. First of all, I think a human-machine interface will be something we have to explore more, in particular with emphasis on the human aspect. And I think we tend to focus on the machine or artificial intelligence technology itself. But I think it is important for us to learn more about how human psychology would move with the application of artificial intelligence. And secondly, I think if we are going to have a more kind of a substantive policy dialogue, a policy debate, it is important for us to further elaborate the concepts, including human in the loop or human responsibility. What do they mean really? And what do they really mean in actionable way? That thirdly, I think we need the continuous assessment of technologies, the positive and negative implications. So we often said, at the evolutionary stage of the technology, we tend to overestimate its implications. But as we assimilate the technology, then we tend to underestimate the implications. So I think it is important for us to keep on assessing the technology itself. Thank you.
Jim, you get the last word.
Thank you. So I'll identify three quickly. The first is we might want to identify specific uses or outcomes that should be banned or constrained. And specific means as specific as possible. Right? What is it you don't want to have happen? What is it you don't want people to do in terms of research and development? Right? Second, we need better links to existing understandings and agreements, binding agreements on WMD and the use of force. There's been some good work on this, but it needs more. And there's fundamental questions about where AI would change, if at all, existing accords on chemical weapons, biological weapons. This came up in one of the earlier panels, nuclear weapons. Third, ask yourself, how would you verify any agreement? Software is exceptionally difficult to verify, right? And things that are intangible like this are difficult to verify. But if you have agreements that one party is ignoring, and that's happened within the last 5 years in other areas of WMD, it undercuts the case for any agreement at all. So I'll say those three.
Thank you all for giving us quite concrete things to move forward on. I know there's a lot of interest and knowledge in the room as well, and I certainly encourage all of you to approach our panelists during the breaks for follow-on discussion. I'm sure we'll continue to have these conversations, but with that, I'd like to first thank the panelists for this rich discussion and close the session. So if you'll join me in applauding them, please.
Thank you. Please give a big round of applause.